There are quite a number of small crossover SUVs on the market, but two of them, the Mazda CX-30 and the Hyundai Kona, really stand out in this crowded market. So how do these two cars compare against each other? Well, let's go for a drive and find out. The Mazda CX-30 is kind of like the old dog in this comparison because it hasn't really seen any major changes for quite some time now. It's still powered by two engines, both of which are 2.5 liters in displacement, but one of them is turbocharged while the other is not. The one that I'm driving today is the turbo version, and I will admit it's not exactly a fair comparison because compared to the Kona N-Line, this engine produces up to 250 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque if you use premium fuel. The naturally aspirated version of this 2.5 liter engine is a better comparison because that engine produces right around the same power as the turbocharged 1.6 liter that's in the Kona N-Line. A long time ago, I did do a review of the CX-30 with that naturally aspirated engine, and you can check it out up here if you're interested. Just be gentle in the comments. Again, it was one of my earlier videos. But getting back to this turbo engine, the power is addicting, especially in a car that is this small. It's almost like a hot hatch. There's just a slight hint of turbo lag, but once the turbocharger spools up, you do get that feeling of getting pushed into the back of the seat with this car. And unlike some other turbocharged four-cylinder engines that are in these type of cars, this one actually sounds really good. You don't really hear the exhaust, but you do hear the intake when you put your foot down. However, with this much power, it's not exactly a very fuel-efficient engine. It's rated for 10.5 liters per 100 kilometers in a city and 7.9 liters per 100 kilometers on a highway. I've been averaging about 10.1 liters per 100 kilometers, which involves mostly city driving, about 60% city, 40% highway. But the Mazda CX-30 is a bit more than just about being a small city crossover SUV. It's actually a lot of fun to drive when you find yourself on more entertaining backcountry roads. The suspension is stiffer than in the Kona, so it resists body roll a bit better through turns, and it doesn't feel as bouncy when you drive over road undulations or really big bumps. The steering has a bit of a heftier weight, so it gives you a little bit better feel than in the Kona, and the 6-speed automatic transmission that is paired with this engine responds really well. You can switch it to sport mode and it'll stay one lower gear so that the engine is always in the right torque band. Or you can switch it into manual mode and start taking over control with the paddle shifters on the steering wheel. These paddle shifters don't react as quickly as they do in a Porsche PDK, for example, but for a car like this, it'll still let you have fun. Now in the Hyundai Kona, it too is available with two engines, but neither of which are as powerful as that turbo engine in the CX-30. The base 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder barely produces 150 horsepower and even less torque. The 1.6 turbo in this N-Line is a bit better at 190 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque. With this Kona N-Line weighing pretty much the same as the CX-30 turbo, you don't get that same strong pushed into the back of the seat feeling as you get in the CX-30. On top of that, this new generation Kona is heavier than the previous generation Kona by about 100 kilograms or 220 pounds, and power remains pretty much the same. So this new car doesn't accelerate as quickly as the old one, never mind the CX-30 turbo. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this car is a slowpoke or anything like that. In everyday city driving, this engine has enough power to get the Kona going offline, merge onto a highway, and it doesn't struggle too much to go up a very steep hill when the car is loaded with passengers and cargo. It's just not as fast as that turbo engine that you get in the CX-30, but it is much more fuel efficient. With this 1.6 turbo engine, it returns 9.4 liters per 100 kilometers in a city and 8.4 liters per 100 kilometers on a highway. Better still, you can get it down to as low as 6.5 liters per 100 kilometers if you stick to mostly highway driving. That's what I noticed when I did some highway-only trips. As a result, my average fuel consumption with the Kona N-Line is 8 liters per 100 kilometers. I tried to drive the Kona in the same manner as the CX-30 Turbo, but I did find myself driving more so on highways in this one than in the CX-30. About 60% highway versus 40% city. Helping it achieve this great highway fuel economy is the new 8-speed automatic transmission. This is a far better transmission than the old 7-speed dual clutch. It still shifts very smoothly, but it doesn't feel as hesitant as the old 7-speed did. Unfortunately, it's not very quick to react to your inputs if you decide to use the paddle shifters, even if you switch the car into sport mode. The 6-speed transmission in the CX-30 is more engaging to use than this 8-speed. And it's the same story when you find yourself driving on more entertaining roads with the Kona N-Line. The steering feels lighter, the suspension feels softer, so it allows for a bit more body roll, and there's more bounce in the suspension when you drive over a big bump or a road undulation in this Kona. Plus, as I said earlier, this new generation Kona is 100 kilograms heavier than the previous generation, so it doesn't quite have that same driving feel and driving engagement as the previous generation did. So as a driver's car, the Mazda CX-30 is more fun than this Kona, despite how sporty this Kona N-Line looks. But once you start looking at this car as a city small crossover SUV rather than a sporty driving small crossover SUV, then it starts to make a bit more sense. With the longer wheelbase and softer suspension, the Kona N-Line rides almost like a compact SUV. It's not all perfect, with quick, sharp potholes at highway speeds being very evident as the 19-inch wheels drive over them. But on city streets with more moderately sized potholes or manhole covers, the suspension copes well. By comparison, the stiffer suspension of the Mazda CX-30 Turbo doesn't isolate the cabin quite as much from road bumps as the Kona. It's by no means an uncomfortable ride, but the ride quality is noticeable between the two models. Having said that, I did find the seats in the Mazda CX-30 to be a bit more comfortable than those in the Hyundai Kona. They feel a bit more plush and supportive on those long commutes to and from work. Sitting in the Mazda, it has a premium feeling interior, which is par for the course because Mazda is trying to move up in the market a little bit. So everything from the dashboard to the door panels to, of course, the seats and the center console, it's all covered in either soft leather or soft to the touch plastics. Of course, the lower portions of the dashboard and the door panels and the center console are made out of hard, scratchy plastic, but for the most part, you won't be touching those areas anyway. The controls and the fit and finish of all of the buttons and knobs is top-notch in this Mazda CX-30 as it is in all Mazda vehicles. Unlike some other manufacturers, Mazda still likes to use physical buttons and knobs. However, the new Mazda CX-5 has me a little bit worried because from looking at the European model, it looks like it just has a giant touchscreen with climate controls integrated into it. Hopefully that's not the case on the North American version, but we will have to wait and see. However, this CX-30 still has traditional knobs which feel great when you turn them and buttons which again feel really good when you press them. Additionally, the Mazda CX-30 still uses analog gauges, at least for the tachometer and the two gauges on the right side of the instrument cluster. The center gauge is actually a digital screen. And speaking of screens, the infotainment is a touchscreen, but it's only enabled when it's running Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, both of which you can connect wirelessly. When you are using the native Mazda infotainment system, you have to use the rotary dial that's on the center console. I think it's totally fine because this infotainment system was designed to work with this rotary dial. And either way, for some individuals, it may be a bit of a stretch to reach the touchscreen. You have to lift your back off of the backrest. So having these center console controls, I think is perfectly fine. In terms of interior space, the CX-30 has pretty much the same amount of legroom in these front seats as the Kona. So for my 6'4" height, I have plenty of leg space. My knees are nowhere near touching the dashboard. In terms of headroom though, it is a little bit less than in the Kona, but because I have this seat at its lowest position, I have more than enough headroom and I can easily see over the hood. So all in all, The interior of the CX-30, at least in the front seats, feels very premium and it's easy to navigate around. But things are a little bit different in the back seats. So compared to the Kona, the CX-30 has a lot less legroom, especially behind my tall 6'4" driving position. I have to keep my legs spread outwards because if I try to keep them, well, I can't even keep them in line with the seats. There just isn't enough legroom for somebody as tall as me. Headroom, well, my hair is brushing up against the headliner and I am sitting higher up than I would be in the front seats. But at least you do get a couple of air vents back here, and that's about it. There's no USB charging ports. The cup holders are in the center armrest if you can lower it all the way down because my leg's in the way. And there is a pretty sizable hump in the center seat. So all in all, this is not a place that I want to sit for very long. In the Hyundai Kona, the materials are not quite as nice as they are in the Mazda CX-30, but it still is a very simple and easy to use interior. There's quite a bit more plastic and less leather than in the CX-30. While it does have physical buttons and toggle switches, they don't quite have the same premium feel as the ones in the CX-30. Additionally, like many other Hyundai vehicles, the Kona does use two screens for the driver instrumentation and for the infotainment system. It doesn't use analog gauges like how the CX-30 does. The infotainment system is controlled exclusively through the touchscreen, and it too does support wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. Navigating around it is pretty straightforward, and it doesn't really take that much time to learn this system if you've never experienced it before. As for interior space, this Kona has the same amount of legroom as the CX-30, but it does have more headroom. This seat is at its lowest position right now, so if you want, you can go back to the CX-30 portion and see just how much more headroom. It's not a huge difference, but it is noticeable just a little bit. Visibility out the front and out the back and in the blind zones is really good in this Kona, just like how it is in the CX-30. Now let's go check out the back seats because that's where things are different between this car and the CX-30. Where in the CX-30 I could barely fit behind my tall 6'4" driving position, here in the Kona, it's not too bad. Yes, my knees are touching the back of the front seat, and unfortunately, it's hard plastic instead of soft leather, but I'm really not complaining compared to the CX-30. Also, I have plenty of space for my feet when the seat is at its lowest position, and my hair isn't brushing up against the headliner like how it does in the Mazda CX-30. I don't really want to be here for too long because it is still a tight space, but it is far better than in the CX-30. In these back seats, you do get a couple of air vents, just like in the CX-30, but you also get two USB-C ports, and the center hump is a little bit smaller than that of the CX-30. And the cup holders are in the center armrest, and you can lower it all the way down because my leg is not in the way. So all in all, in the back seats of this Hyundai Kona, far better than the CX-30. The trunk also benefits from the larger size of the Kona. It can accommodate 723 liters of space behind the back row and 1,803 liters with the 60/40 rear seats folded. There is some space underneath the floor, but the Kona N-Line does not have a spare wheel. Instead, it's a tire mobility kit. The CX-30 has 572 liters of space behind the rear seats and 1,280 liters with those second row seats folded. Under the trunk floor, the Mazda CX-30 is equipped with a temporary spare wheel. What about the pricing then? Well, as you would expect, the Hyundai Kona does have a lower starting price than this Mazda CX-30. It's about 3,000 Canadian dollars in difference. And that's because the Kona is available with front-wheel drive, whereas the Mazda CX-30 is only available with all-wheel drive, at least here in Canada. But things are different once you go up to the other end of the price spectrum. The Kona N-Line still is a little bit cheaper than the GT trim of the Mazda CX-30 without the turbo engine. Add on the turbo engine, which is about $2,500 Canadian, then of course this is about just over $40,000 Canadian. However, if you add the ultimate package, which is 3,000 Canadian dollars to the Kona N-Line, then the price difference between these two cars is less than $1,000 Canadian. So what kind of gadgets do you get for that kind of money? Well, both of the cars have a few of the same convenience features, such as heated front seats and heated steering wheels, wireless phone charging pads, dual zone automatic climate controls, power sunroofs, and so on. But there are some differences. If you add the Ultimate package to the Kona N-Line, then it also comes with surround view cameras, just like the Mazda CX-30, and also ventilated front seats, which the Mazda CX-30 does not have. But instead, the Mazda CX-30 does get a head-up display, a power liftgate, and in addition to having leather upholstery, whereas this Kona N-Line is more of a suede upholstery on the center of the seats. Both crossovers come equipped with the vast majority of safety and driver aids that are available on each vehicle. But there are just a few features that are only available on higher spec trims. In the Mazda, traffic sign recognition, front and rear parking sensors, head-up display, surround view cameras, and cruise and traffic support are only available on the GT and Suna trims. In the Kona, remote parking assist, highway driving assist, blind view monitor, surround view cameras, front, rear, and side parking distance warning, and reverse parking collision avoidance are only available on the N-Line with the Ultimate package. These packaging options are for the Canadian market. So although these two cars compete against each other, they couldn't be any more different from one another. The Hyundai Kona is a comfortable and practical daily commuter, whereas the Mazda CX-30 is better to drive with a slightly nicer interior for pretty much the same price as the Hyundai Kona N-Line with the Ultimate package. So which of the two is better? That's hard to say because it really depends on what your needs are. For example, I like a car that drives better, and although the CX-30 is smaller than the Kona, for my lifestyle, it would be just enough space. But again, that's just me. What about you? Which one would you choose, or would you pick another one? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to know more about either of these two cars, I have a more detailed comparison review of them over on my website. You can find that link in the video description or click on the pop-up banner right up there. And as always, I will see you in the next car, truck, or most likely another SUV. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you in the next one.